Joining me now is Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, one of the architects of India's economic reforms. Dr. Ahluwalia, do you see the potential for GST reforms at a time of Trump tariffs becoming a game changer? Dr. Ahluwalia? Dr. Ahluwalia, can you hear me? Okay, we're trying to get through to Dr. Ahluwalia at the moment. Remember, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, as I said, has been one of the architects of economic reforms in the country, someone who's spent a lifetime really looking at the state of the economy, former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, he's been Finance Secretary, he was part of what was then dubbed as Dr. Manmohan Singh's dream team that looked at how to really take India out of the slow growth trap, the 1991 reforms, and many believe that GST, which was brought in by the Narendra Modi government in 2016, was a major transformation in indirect taxation in the country. The idea of creating a one tax, one nation regime. But over the years, because of differential slabs, there have been question marks over GST, both on compliance issues, both on how do you simplify the tax. And at a moment like this, when the Trump tariffs have come in place, GST becomes very important, because how do you then in some way spur domestic demand? The hope, of course, and the Prime Minister announced this at his Independence Day speech, was that this would be part of a Diwali dhamaka. Now, against the backdrop of that, we've had a meeting like this. I want to go straight across to Montek Singh Ahluwalia now. Dr. Ahluwalia, how do you see this GST reforms that are likely to come in the next 24 to 48 hours? Can they be a game changer at a time when Trump tariffs have loomed large over the economy?
Well, what I've heard is that there will be a big reduction in rates across a large number of commodities. That's more or less what I think the Prime Minister had implied, because it's kind of a Diwali gift. And that will be welcomed by consumers, no doubt. But that's not a reform. I mean, if you want to reform the GST, then you have to address some of the structural deficiencies in the GST, which have been talked about for some time. It's difficult to judge what the GST Council is actually discussing. If it's just discussing a reduction in rates, that's fine. If the government can afford the loss of revenue, people will be happy. But if you're talking about reforms, then you need to talk about what's the structural change that constitutes a reform. There are lots of things that have to be done to the GST, but I have no idea whether that's what they're thinking of. Frankly, I think this raises a larger issue. There's a fault in the GST Council system. In the days when these matters went before Parliament, the Finance Minister in the budget speech would make some proposals, then these would be discussed both within Parliament and outside Parliament. Government would hear different points of view, and then they could take a view on modifying them in the light of discussions. These GST discussions are all behind the curtain. What is being proposed is not put forth in the public, so you just have to wait until the GST Council decides. And the problem is that once it's decided, that's final. Even in Parliament,
but they have all but Dr. Ahluwalia,
I feel that.
But the fact is, all the finance ministers are present at this. May I just stop you for a moment to say that all the finance ministers are present at the meeting. There is generally a consensus that by and large GST has been a positive for the country. The idea that you could...
I've absolutely no doubt that the introduction of the GST has been a huge positive. It's also true that many people have felt that the GST that we put in place is not an ideal one. I mean, remember, in terms of revenue, we have been getting less revenue than the previous peak as a percent of GDP. I think instead of 6.5%, it came down to about 5.6. But then we had a lot of cesses, which are outside the GST. If you include the cess, we've just about reached where we were just before the GST was introduced. Now, the idea of the GST was that it would promote compliance and lead to an increase in revenue as a share of GDP. That has not happened. Even if you include the cess realization, as a share of GDP, revenues are actually a little below what they were at their peak. Now, it's well known what needs to be done, and people have talked about it. I mean, they've said that we have too many rates. That's not at all what a GST does. A purist would say you should have just one rate, but people would concede that maybe you need two. And of course, you have a certain number of commodities exempted. Now, we at the moment have about 7 rates, including the low ones for jewelry. We are getting, according to the newspapers, we are going to get rid of the 12% rate and bring it down to everything in 12% will go down to, or most of it will go down to 5. That's a straight reduction of the rate. I don't know how much will actually go up to 18. It's not clear what we're going to do with the 28% rate. It's not clear what we're going to do with the cess. Is the cess going to continue? And there's a real issue there. The cess, in my view, is an aberration, because what it is doing is it is generating tax-related revenue which is not shared with the states. Now, half the problem that the states have is that the cess is not something that's shared with them. Now, all these things have to be looked at in a composite way, and I feel that the best thing would have been for whatever proposal, let's say, the Finance Ministry wants to take to the GST, should have gone forward as a sort of proposal. And then they hear all the finance ministers and the council takes a view. But that proposal should have been made public so we know what is being proposed and we can talk about what the problems are.
Right.
Let me just give you one simple example. You know, if you reduce, let's say if you reduce the 15% rate down to 5, what will happen is that, yes, the rate will go down, but actually a lot of the input tax credit, which normally accrues when you're at 15, will no longer accrue, because at 5, the input tax credit is limited to the input tax credit only on goods and not on services and not on capital investment. So actually, these individuals who will end up with a lower, the producers, who will end up paying a lower tax, will also lose a lot of input tax credit. So I'm not sure the net what the effect is going to be. And I think that we need to consider this question. Are we willing to have 2 rates? Personally, I think 5% is too low a rate. I know it's very attractive, but you know, I would have thought if you wanted a single rate, probably what you should have done is have a 14% rate, which is 6% for the center, 6% for the states, and 2% for urban local bodies and local, the third level of government, because they don't get anything. And yet these urban local bodies lost a lot of revenue when the Octroi was abolished. Now, that would be a real reform. If you don't want to have just one rate, then you can have 2. But I'm not sure whether that is even on the agenda at the moment. And I do think that the issue of cess needs to be addressed. I mean,
so
there
I
is
think,
no
I think
logic
you've given us
in cess accounting for a
us
rising percentage of revenue.
I think you've given us, Dr. Aluwalia, an idea. You've given us an idea which I hope is going to be looked at. 6% for the states, 6% for the center, and 2% for urban local bodies. So you could have, in your view, a 14% rate. Very quickly, do you believe, though, that we will therefore either way have a better GST in place? And that's one of the learnings of the last 8 years since GST has been in place. Every government makes possible mistakes. Very quickly, I have a minute only on the show with you. Do you believe, therefore, that we are at least moving in the right direction, that there is now a wake-up call, that we cannot have such a complicated GST structure, which many believe has even led to corruption, with GST notices being sent by GST inspectors?
But that, let me say, that's not a wake-up call. that has been known for some time. All that we're doing at the moment is picking one of these rates and lowering it massively. I do feel that if we want to move towards a single rate structure, then what I've suggested, that is 6%, 6% and 2%, would be very good. You know, frankly, urbanization cannot be financed unless the urban local bodies get more revenue. And this is the best way of doing it. I will concede that maybe one rate may be too much.
Okay.
You can have a second rate. But at the moment, we seem to have too many.
Okay, let me leave it there. Let me leave it there, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. I hope someone there in those meetings is listening to your voice of wisdom. We have far too many rates. The time has come to rationalize GST. Will that happen in the next 24 hours? We'll wait and see. Thank you very much for joining us.